Anbernic, a company known for making premium quality hardware, and when I saw the RG35XX Plus, I couldn't help but think an analog stick would just complete the device, given it could play PlayStation, Dreamcast and Nintendo 64. Well, it seems Anbernic has read my mind, as they have delivered the RG35XX-H, a horizontal edition that features 2 additional analog sticks, but retains the pocketable form factor and, more importantly, budget price. So, ridiculous name, but is this the most complete budget handheld out there? Let's find out. So here is the Anbernic RG35XX-H, and I got the case with it, which actually I'm really impressed with. More on that one later. And this is the actual unboxing. So you can see here, as always with Anbernic, really premium quality feel to the box. They give you a screen protector, which is pretty handy and pretty easy to install, and also the wipes and everything that you need with that. And of course, you get the additional charge cable, which is extremely useful. And here is the device. And I have to say, initial impressions, I love the form factor. It feels good, it's the right weight, it's the right size. So I'm pretty excited to try this one out. So to understand how we've got to this device, quick history lesson. Anbernic initially came out with the RG350, and they were the first really premium Chinese handhelds on the market. You can see the 351MP here. Then Mini came out with a device which really took the world by storm. It had this tiny form factor and everybody liked it, premium quality feel to it, and played everything, backed by the community. Of course, getting those small screens was extremely difficult, so they came out with the Plus edition, and Anbernic decided to copy this with their own budget R335XX, a system that I reviewed last year and really liked, but sadly was plagued with reliability issues, which then brings us to, of course, the latest version, which essentially reverts back to the 351 style design. Now I've got to say, ergonomically, I love this device. It's slightly thicker and heavier than I expected, but it still really is pocketable. The buttons feel extremely high quality, the D-pad feels great, the buttons have a glossy feel with rubber membrane connections, of course the 2 switch sticks, the R2 and L1 buttons, they're a little bit clicky, the parallel buttons here, but they feel great. Of course, with Anbernic on the back, you get these nice rubber pads to stop the item moving, and stereo speakers on the bottom. You've also got your standard volume buttons on the left, power buttons on the right, but overall, yes, absolutely love this device. Let's talk about the specs, and the critical thing here is the quad-core ARM Cortex-A53, which is far superior to the original 35XX model and more superior to competitors at this price range, meaning that you're going to get some fairly decent Dreamcast and N64 here. The other thing that I want to point out here is the Wi-Fi built-in and Bluetooth built-in. Now this does something that really sets this one apart. It means this can be a real consoleized experience. Frustratingly, the Bluetooth doesn't support audio, but given the system has HDMI out, this allows you to consoleize the device, meaning that this really is the ultimate budget system on the go. So far, love the design, fantastic features. And another thing I want to highlight, again, is the case. Now, I love the slim design of this case. It means that the device is pocketable, but isn't going to get damaged in your pocket or any grit on the screen. So when you put this in, it even has additional storage for charging cables, additional micro SD cards, etc. And still in this great form factor, which I have been super impressed with. To give you an idea, let's take a look at some comparable handhelds here. This is the original 350 with the case, which is about 3 times the width. It's pretty chunky. And even the tiny Mini has a fairly wide, chunky case. This is the Mini Plus as well, which, as you can see, is much thicker. So I'm really impressed with this, and this has been a definite big selling point for me. Just to add, here's the Powkiddy RGB30, again, far chunkier. Let's take a look at the size comparison here, because the comparable device is of course the 351MP, which is a very similar design, but a fair bit thicker, and I have the metal edition, which is a fair bit heavier. Then we come to what I think is this system's biggest competitor, and that is the Pico RGB30. Now you can see here actually there's a fair bit of size difference in terms of these units, both in terms of thickness and in terms of height. And just to give you an idea, the Miu Mini here, which is a fair bit smaller than the current device. This is the RG35XX Plus to give you an idea of the size comparison. So slightly larger, but you can see here, if we look, the screen size is identical when you look at these side by side. It's just a different configuration. Let's talk about the interface here, because this frustratingly is where things start to unravel. Now, the interface is not offensive. There's some nice touches. The themes mean you can select it to look the way that you want it to look, but it is a little clunky, and frustratingly, I've had quite a few issues with things either hanging or taking a while to load. Obviously, this is all software, so it can be fixed. Now, Anbernic systems have closed source code, and I think Anbernic seems to have really missed what makes the emulation scene so progressive, and that's the community, talented programmers and developers giving their time to enhance software. And the 350, ironically, pioneered this. And if we look at some of the systems that are seen as best in class, the Miu Mini OS is terrible, but Onion OS, a community build, makes it one of the best systems and drives sales. Similarly, the Pico RGB30 has the Gelos, which really has been customized around it by the community and makes those systems fantastic. And for some reason, Anbernic has decided they don't want to engage with this community. Even things like Bluetooth audio, I'm sure someone would be able to easily implement this and make the unit even better without Anbernic having to lift a finger. Now, I don't normally comment on the games provided with the system. I tend to source my own, but given that I didn't reformat this device, I did have a look, and I have to say, if you are not tech savvy enough to either dump your own games or find your own games, however you do it, this is going to be a problem, because no N64 games on the device, no Mario games at all. So I think this is potentially a problem for some people. And I think the worst thing of all is the just per system configuration. So I always kick off with the Mega Drive. Sonic the Hedgehog is a game that I know extremely well. And immediately playing this, despite the hardware and the specifications, it feels like there's some sort of frame skip on when running the default configuration. So naturally, I thought, well, maybe they've just configured this with all sorts of quality of life improvements, run ahead, rewind, maybe there's a shader going on that's potentially giving it some problems. So I decided to check the settings, and it revealed that this is nothing. This is just running on the standard core within RetroArch with none of the bells and whistles. And considering the hardware, this shouldn't be a problem. Now, is this a driver issue? Is this a software issue? I don't know, but it was strange to start off with Mega Drive emulation subpar on this hardware. But then frustratingly, it actually got a bit worse. I actually found myself in a situation where games would take a long time to start compared to other systems, and then the controller stopped responding completely. So I'm sat there waiting all of this time, and you can see here for the game to load, and then the controller didn't work. And this probably has happened to me 5 or 6 times now. Like I say, not necessarily a huge issue. You can just go into the RetroArch settings and reset, which fixes things. But when you're having to make tweaks to get the system to run properly, having to then effectively reset your RetroArch settings to default did get a little bit frustrating. Thankfully, I did get to a good place where the game was running nicely and was very playable. But having to do this on a fairly low-end system like the Mega Drive feels like a step that the user shouldn't have to do. Another observation that I saw earlier was that there were no Nintendo 64 games, and I added some, and frustratingly, this is what I got. Again, very, very poor performance on Mario 64, which is a pretty low-end game. Like I say, no real need for this to be the case. This should run this no problem at all. And thankfully, after changing the core and tweaking some settings, I was able to get this running and even up the resolution, which is very, very positive. This system should be playing most N64 games, at least at native resolution. So again, not a deal breaker, but disappointing that the standard stock OS hasn't worked here. But by the end, I managed to get to a place with some configuration where I was reasonably happy with what I was playing and the games ran smoothly. Now, thankfully, when we look at the Dreamcast, things get a lot better. Every game that I tried ran extremely well and was extremely playable, and the ability to take it portable with those control sticks meant that this game played really well. You're looking at Soul Calibur here, but even games that sometimes can have issues with emulators, such as Virtua Tennis, ran really well. Now, that's where I do a lot of my input lag testing. Virtua Tennis on any game, in any system with input lag, will typically give you real problems when you're serving, because that split-second precision you need for the power serve is almost impossible if you're trying to not preempt and guess when to press it. Thankfully here, it worked really, really well, and I was very, very impressed overall with Dreamcast performance on this device. And if you're looking for a cheap, low-end Dreamcast system, I don't think you can go a lot better for $60. Another system that I've started to get into recently is the Pico 8, and you can see here playing Celeste, the screen dimensions aren't perfect. Of course, the Powkiddy RGB30 is probably more optimal, but given that this works, and actually the 4:3 screen works with most other systems, I think that this is a fine compromise for this system, and it plays really, really well. Now, PlayStation is another one which worked really, really well. It uses the PCSX Reloaded RetroArch core, and I had to say I had no issues with the PlayStation whatsoever. And actually, the addition of those two control sticks, which is kind of the main selling point of the device, was welcome on certain games. So this is another system that you're going to get a lot of good times out if you go for this device. And like I say, $60 for great Dreamcast and PlayStation emulation on the go and the ability to consoleize it is certainly a good thing. And I have to say, after a bad start, I started to get far more positive results with a lot of lower end systems. Obviously, you can see this is the Game Boy, which shouldn't give you any problems. And that's the case here, no issues whatsoever. And actually, this is a really enjoyable Game Boy device. And the same thing can be said for Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. The games run well, I had no noticeable input lag, and the screen looks fantastic. Game Boy Advance obviously isn't a perfect fit for the 4:3, but it's more than good enough. And that narrative really continues throughout a lot of legacy systems. If you look at the SNES, where after the performance with the Mega Drive, I was expecting problems, I had absolutely no problems at all. And the same went for the TurboGrafx 16. And even low-end classic arcade games, you can see here, I'm playing Marvel vs. Street Fighter. So again, it really does reprieve itself. I still found the software sometimes a little slow when switching between games, but everything here runs very, very nicely. On to a couple of the more difficult systems here. Now, the Nintendo DS actually also ran pretty well, and I like the ability to just flip the screen configuration by just pressing the left bumper. So if you wanted to just have the top screen, like I can see here, then that was easy enough to switch. But then if you wanted to see them both just for some menu configurations, that could be done too. And again, no issues with this one. It seems to run very, very nicely. I didn't notice any major slowdown. And the final one to mention here is the PlayStation Portable. Now, I've just left this in the default configuration. You can see here the screen is stretched, so the standard widescreen, it doesn't do borders. It puts it into 4:3 format, which I'm not a huge fan of. This is Tekken 6, which is definitely one of the more demanding games. And you can see here, I think frame skip is on. There's various minor hangs. It doesn't feel great, but certainly some PSP games are going to work. So I would look at the PSP with this system as more of a bonus than something that you buy it for if your particular game happens to work for you. So where are we with this system? And I guess hopeful is a phrase that I think would sum things up. On the one hand, I think the hardware is fantastic. I think that the case that it comes with and the ability to consoleize the system means this is very much the complete handheld from a hardware perspective. The issue with the software and it being clunky and not optimized, I think is a little frustrating. So I guess I definitely feel that the real narrative here is watch this space with this one, because software can be improved. Of course, Garlic OS is in development, and I believe there will be a version which will change things significantly for this device. So I'm very, very hopeful for the future that this will be one of the better handhelds in the market. But for now, I can't really recommend this over your either the Miu Mini or the RGB30, or even if you wanted to spend a little bit more money and just go for the Retro Pocket 2 Plus. As always, I hope you enjoyed the review. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.